in Algebra 2, our study of statistics, we've reached a point where we want to start talking about the next steps for what we do with statistics. Now, for this stage, we're just going to talk about how you form a hypothesis, not actually get into how the hypothesis is tested. So hypothesis testing is where you look at something you want to research or survey or find out information about, and you're going to set up a hypothesis to try to show that what you believe to be true is true. So hypothesis testing, first of all, it's a proposal that you think is true. That you, let's say you believe to be true. Now, what makes a good hypothesis is that it's a very clear statement, it's not ambiguous, that also it's measurable, that you can do some testing on it and find out something that is actually quantifiable, and then also that you are able to test it or find a find some way to find out if it's true or not. Now, a null hypothesis. This is where hypothesis testing seems counterintuitive, but what it does is it puts the burden of proof on showing that what you think is true is actually true. Otherwise, we're going to assume that it's not true. So what you want to do for the null hypothesis is assume your proposal is false. What you want to be your actual hypothesis, you're proposing it to be true. Well, you're going to assume it's false, and then you've got to have the burden of proof show that it's true. So when we have a null hypothesis, we write it this way. We write an H with a sub-zero. So a sub-zero, we often call that a null. So put that as a subscript, H sub-zero. How it's read is H sub-zero. Now the alternate hypothesis, this is the thing that you want the burden of proof to show, will be actually what you believe to be true. You want to prove that this null hypothesis is false, so that, again, the counterintuitive part, a double negative would make what you originally believed to be true. So prove that the null hypothesis is true. Prove that the null hypothesis is false. So it's a double negative. A false would mean that your original, what you were trying to prove, is true. So we write that as H sub A. The A standing for the alternative hypothesis. All right, so what we're trying to really prove here when we're doing this, what are we trying to prove? We're trying to prove that the burden of data shows that we can validate what we believe to be true is true. So what we're saying is we're trying to prove that that chance has not come into play. So chance is not responsible for supporting our proposal. The burden of proof shows we are correct. And I'll put in here, or not. Sometimes we can't prove it. Sometimes we can't get enough data to push us over the top to show that our null hypothesis is false, and therefore our original proposal is true. So let's take a look at what this means in terms of some actual examples. We're just going to write the null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis. So an example here, improving fruit output with a type of fertilizer. So what we're trying to do is we'll set up an experiment. So we'd have, for instance, a control group. And then we'd have an experiment group. All right, so when we do this, if this is, say, fruit trees, we apply the fertilizer to the experiment group and we wouldn't to the control group. So our null hypothesis, H sub 0, this is how we write it, null hypothesis with a colon. What we'd say is that the control group their output is greater than or equal to the experiment group output. So what we're saying is the control group, which didn't have the fertilizer, if it shows that it has the same output as the experiment group, or even more output than the experiment group, then our original proposal isn't true. The fertilizer doesn't help it. Our alternative hypothesis, so what we want to show, if we prove this is false, the alternative would be that the control group output would be less than the experiment group output. So we would get more fruit from the experiment group in the alternative. So remember, the burden of proof is we want to assume that it's not true, and then the burden of proof is to show that it is, if we have enough data to show that. Okay, so for this next one, it's the eco mode on the car improves gas mileage. So our null hypothesis is that what we'd have is that the regular mode, okay, on a car, where you don't use the eco mode, regular mode, MPG, miles per gallon, is greater than or equal to the eco mode, MPG. So if we don't use the eco mode, is that get better gas mileage, or at least equal gas mileage to the eco mode? That's what we're going to assume to be true. And then if the burden of proof shows that that's a false statement, then we can accept the alternative hypothesis, is that the regular mode, MPG, is less than the eco mode, MPG. And so our eco mode then would have better gas mileage. So just what we're trying to do is set up the idea here of what a hypothesis test is. We're not going to do not going to do the hypothesis testing. That will be for statistics class. But to understand the idea that a hypothesis test is where if you've got something you want to propose, you assume, using the null hypothesis, the opposite is true. And then if the burden of proof shows that that statement is false, then you can say that by the null hypothesis not being true, that what we're trying to propose is actually true.